Okay, hi everybody. It's Nathan Rodahl here again with my guest David Cho. Hi, David.
Hi, Nathan.
David, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe some of your history before we get started here?
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Thanks for having me on. And it was quite the story as to how Nathan and I met, and I'll leave that story to Nathan. I am a cellist. I play professionally, and over the past 10 years, I've gone into music education. My role in music education right now is I teach strings in Catholic schools.
Mhm.
That means I have several Catholic schools that I where I visit weekly, and I also have a part-time high school teaching position at St. John Paul the Great High School in Dumfries, Virginia. And I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm particularly enjoying being a strings-only person. And that privilege has come to me in the past 4 years. Before my foray into music education, I was a professional freelance artist where I was playing with many of the best people in the area and playing on the best stages in the area, including Kennedy Center, Wolf Trap, National Gallery of Art. And I've also enjoyed the privilege of being a concerto soloist with several orchestras. I came to Washington, D.C. in 2006. No, I'm sorry, 2006 in the fall. And before I came to Washington, D.C., I was an assistant principal cellist in the Memphis Symphony Orchestra for 12 seasons. And I consider that an important part of my educational experience, in that I feel that I bring a lot of my knowledge and expertise from having played a lot of the major symphony orchestra repertoire, not just from Memphis, but from my time before Memphis, when I was freelancing in a lot of different orchestras during my years before I got my job in Memphis. So that's a little about my professional experience. I have a bachelor's degree in music performance from University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And I transferred to USC from Indiana University in Bloomington. And then I received a Master of Music degree in cello performance from the New England Conservatory of Music, where I had the amazing privilege of studying with Bernard Greenhouse. So I hope that's enough of my background.
I've been playing kids a bunch of the videos of that group, A Far Cry, that performs there at NEC.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some interested parties in that school in particular.
Oh, they're amazing. They're amazing. Yeah.
So as we get started here, I figure maybe I have to tell the story of how we came to meet. So this was last year when I was still working at Rogers High School in Puyallup. I'm in DC with my orchestra students and the band and choir students also there. And the tour company, for God knows why, didn't rent any of the low strings that I was supposed to have. So I'd go onto the school orchestra teachers page on Facebook and just say, help, emergency, anybody in DC that can help me get some instruments? And David replied right away and suggested, is it Fox's Music Company?
Fox's Music in Falls Church.
In Falls Church, and Dave Balatzis. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Balazis.
So sorry, Dave, if you're watching.
Right.
And hooked me up right away. And I think you actually came out and met us at the Arlington National Cemetery with the instruments. And that was just tremendous, because we had to play about a half hour after we were done there at the cemetery. So with your help, we were actually able to perform on that trip, where otherwise we would have had to nix everything. It would have been terrible.
Yeah, and I remember the parking attendants still trying to shoo me out of there.
Yeah, we were practically running from the tour bus into the road, and they were shooing you away. Mm-hmm. Oh gosh. Well, anyhow, thank you so much for that, and I'm glad that this has turned into a blossoming professional relationship here.
Likewise, appreciate it.
So as we get started here, the point of this podcast is kind of to supplement the not being in the classroom for our orchestra students. So if we could start with some of the more basic things of just how to build a cello bow hold, like very, very simple, like step by step. If you got a cute little story that goes with it, or any other helpful hints Just I've got my bow buddy here, and if we could build
Okay.
a bow hold together, that would be great.
Okay. So one thing I like to do is, excuse me, actually take your left hand and hold the bow in the middle of the stick.
Okay.
That way you've got a support for your bow.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to say, particularly to my elementary students, let's form the perfect P with our middle finger and thumb.
Mm-hmm.
That perfect P goes in a little strip of the stick part of the grip between the black leather grip and the frog.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now this is where we can get into bunny ear, pirate ships, or all kinds of things like that.
Oh yeah.
Spy guy is the ring finger that goes on the eyelet.
Mm-hmm.
Captain Hook is on the leather grip, and the little parrot guy can either go on top of the stick or just below the stick edge of the grip.
Okay.
Now, note, if a lot of your students still have trouble supporting the bow like this,
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage them to curl the pinky a little more and put the tip of the pinky on top of the stick and start sort of creating a sense of fulcrum
Yeah.
between the pinky and the thumb.
Yeah.
Stuff I'm sure everyone's heard before, but I think it's really important. Another one of my favorite exercises is balance the bow with the pinky and the thumb. And I discovered that this takes time and a lot of strength. So
I do the
might,
pinky push-ups behind the head.
yeah. So you might want to have your left hand below the stick anyway, just to support, as a safety valve. This one's a little easier. I often like to turn over and balance the bow with the thumb and the index finger.
Okay.
That's very important. I often like to say, got it. I often like to say, if you can see it,
Uh-huh.
the best way to get your bow hand in the least tense state is to just form that bow hand and point the stick towards the ceiling. I mean, the tip towards the ceiling, excuse me. And then just do a little finger action. Now, another thing with the bow technique I like to really emphasize is let's hold my bow like this.
Okay.
I like to think of my right wrist really flopping up and down. I really don't like having the wrists move from side to side exclusively. There might be a little bit of that, but I want the primary action to be the wrist flopping up and down. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That way you maintain as much suppleness, flexibility, but still as much leverage to the bow as possible. Okay? So that's, in a nutshell, what I believe about the technique with the bow.
Okay. If you wanted to help me get through like a really basic 1-octave scale, thinking about the bow in particular, I'm not sure how Zoom is going to handle this because it usually takes whoever is talking and makes that the image when I download the video. So we'll see what happens with the audio here with both of us playing. But if you'd walk me through what to think about with my bow on a 1-octave scale, maybe
1-octave scale. All right, a 1-octave G major is the best to do because the G and D strings are often the least extreme in terms of the angles of the bow to those particular strings.
Okay.
And what I like to think of is, for whatever string your bow is on, take the two surrounding strings.
Okay.
And imagine a straight line on the bridge between the two strings surrounding the string you're on. That means if your bow is on the G string, imagine a straight line from the D string to the C string on the bridge, and have your put your bow parallel to that imaginary line.
Okay.
And let's just start with drawing the bow from just over the silver grip.
Yep.
Maybe to the halfway point.
All right.
Okay. Now, are you imagining that straight line?
I've got it.
And keeping your bow parallel to that?
Yep.
Now let's just go straight. Keep that bow parallel to that straight line and just go silver grip to middle and back. Let's keep the variables of the bow hand and bow wrist out of play for now. So down bow and stop. Okay, up bow. Okay, now even on the G string, Nathan, make sure that I see your bow tip up and towards you. I really want the bow tip down and away from you.
Okay. Can you maybe show us some of what the extremes look like and why they're bad?
If the bow tip is up, and bow tip is up and frog away is from you on the G string, that's worst case scenario of what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you do manage to keep your bow in the same contact point with your bow angled not in the best way, you're really making it hard on yourself to keep leverage from the bow to the string at the tip.
Okay.
This angle is much more suitable for the D string or the A string, but not the G string. That's why I really insist that when you're starting a down bow at the frog on the lower strings, the tip swings away from you. So swing that tip away from you more. And that means bring the bow arm into the cello more and really lower that shoulder. Now, in order to keep that bow parallel to that line on the bridge between the two flanking strings on the G string, that being the D string and C string, pull your elbow in a backwards kind of direction. Backwards even more. That becomes a lot easier to keep that bow in the string at the tip. Up bow. Flex the wrist, bring the arm in. Down bow. Really pull that elbow backwards towards behind you. Yes, up bow. Down bow. Pull that arm backward and let that bow really orient towards the bridge. You see that? Up bow. Okay. Now D string, that's going to change.
Okay.
Put your bow on the D string. Let the tip swing towards you a little bit more. And for the D string, imagine that straight line on the bridge between the A string and the G string. Now on the D string, the arm will move away from you. The wrist, the hand, and the frog will move away from you more.
Okay.
Okay. Up bow. Down bow. Arm towards away from you. That's better. Up bow. You see how that works?
Yes.
And are you seeing your contact point stay more consistent?
Yes. It's not sliding around all over the place.
Yeah. And I'm not a geometrist or a physicist, but they say it's principles of geometry and physics as to force, motion, and angles, or shapes, basically. When you talk about keeping your bow straight, you can talk about keeping the bow perpendicular to the string, but using the frame of reference of the straight line between the two flanking strings to the primary string on which you're playing is another frame of reference that will help you keep that, as I like to say, keep the hair square to the string.
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
On the A string, you're going to draw that imaginary line between the D string
Mm-hmm.
and the left corner of the bridge.
Okay.
So A string, let's just go frog to middle and middle to frog. Out and away and back. Out and away and back. Okay, one thing I'm seeing right now, and I see this with a lot of cellists as they're developing.
Uh-huh.
I don't like to see that pinky down flat and the pinky tip pointing towards the audience.
Oh, okay.
And the reason is, if your pinky is down and flat like this, you're giving up a lot of flexibility
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of leverage by letting that pinky flatten out like that. I always like to keep an upright pinky.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, granted, some cellists will say, gee, Mr. Cho, you're looking more and more like a violinist over there. Well, my wife, who is an amazing violinist, likes to point out how my cello playing has evolved since I've been teaching and playing and demonstrating on the violin a lot.
Uh-huh.
And another cellist to whom I look up immensely, he found himself, when he was at the Juilliard School, he found himself observing violinists more than he found himself observing cellists.
Really?
Yes. And that's because he noticed that violins technically were just so much more at ease getting around the instrument than cellists were. So he in a sort of indirect way, encouraged me to really look at violin playing.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, not everything. Now, a cellist can't do everything to emulate a violinist, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of ways, it's good for an instrumentalist to observe other instruments within their same family of instruments, particularly string instruments, particularly cellists, I find.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another way I really gravitate more towards violin technique is in the left hand.
Okay.
And I particularly like to have my fingers, even in first position, slanted towards the string and pointing downward towards the string instead of square and across like this.
Mm.
I like the elbow slanted back and the finger slanted, angled towards the string, more like maybe, I don't know, 60-30, something like that, because of vibrato. If you can see this, I don't know if you can, your finger does this kind of motion much more naturally.
Yeah.
And does this kind of motion, okay?
One of my favorite cellists, Misha Maisky, is like very much at like a almost horizontal with his hand sometimes to
Yes.
get that intense vibrato.
Yeah. And I refer back to my introduction where I studied with Bernard Greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
He showed me that trick too.
Awesome.
So, and you know, the late Bernie Greenhouse, only one of the most beautiful sounding cellists ever, and one of the most elegant vibratos ever. The guy could do things with vibrato that I certainly didn't know was possible. Let me show you just
Well, let me ask a quick question here. While we're talking about the finger angle, how does that change when I want to do extended fourth finger or open hand position, depending on how you say that?
Then all that goes out the window.
Oh, okay.
and Mr. Greenhouse did say that.
Okay.
He did acknowledge that there are certain instances where you don't have a choice in the matter. like in Dvorak. Right there.
Mhm.
Where you just don't have a choice in the matter.
Now, when you're moving to that position, do you bring
Yes,
the elbow down
the elbow just has to swing.
all at the same time? You don't like
Yes.
prepare it or anything like that?
Well, you probably do anticipate with the
Yeah.
elbow. But really, that brings me to another point where both Mr. Greenhouse and Mr. Timothy Eddy brought up the idea of your shifting really comes from your shoulder.
Mm.
And it really comes from the point in space where your shoulder blade moves to.
Okay.
Like, let's say G major scale. On 4th finger G, the 1st finger E. Your shoulder blade is in a different place. Then shoulder blade kind of squeezes back a little bit for first position. Okay.
Yeah, that's a big difference between, as I learn more about playing cello, the difference between shoulder instruments and the floor instruments, bass and cello, is the complexity of the muscle groups working together and deciding which muscle moves first. On violin, viola, everything is just so much smaller, and it's kind of clear what happens. The arm is just really like shifting gears. But you don't think about too much between elbow and shoulder until you're experiencing tension.
Yeah. And generally with cello, I'll only talk about cello because that's what I know best. The bigger muscles, the more you can initiate everything from the bigger muscles, the better off you are.
Okay.
Now, of course, when you're playing, I'm not gonna really try, but any fast passage work, then it's mostly wrist and finger. Like sorry about that. You can cut that out. Yeah. So but even there, there's still going to be a tiny bit of movement in the arm, but a lot more of it's going to come from being flexible in the wrist and fingers. Now, that's where I come back to my previous point of making sure that your bow technique, your wrist is really flopping up and down more than it's moving side to side.
Like that?
Yes, exactly.
So maybe many of us are stuck in this idea that it's this way, horizontal, and like this.
Yeah.
But you're showing us that really it's more at this angle.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know violinists are constantly working on their collé. And I encourage cellists to work on that same idea too. Okay. And in fact, another great violin pedagogue actually recommends that in her beginning cello classes, that the cellist will just take on the violinist bow hand for a while, just to make sure they don't ever get into the habit of letting this sagging.
I call that the claw.
Yeah.
Or T-Rex arm.
Yeah. Or anyway, so that's one thing to think about is really emulating violin technique in a lot of ways, both in vibrato and in your bow, in the way you bow. So.
Well, I don't think we ever got around to that scale. How about a scale?
Okay. You want to do G major 2 octaves?
Sure.
Go ahead. Oh, can you actually tilt your camera downward so
so you can see my bow better? Yeah.
Yeah, see your bow better. Yeah. That's better. Now, on the G string, Really make sure. All right, don't. Yes, yeah, yes. That's great with your angle of the bow on the G string. Now, as you pull down bow, let the contact between the hair and the string still act as your axis point, no matter where in the bow you're pulling. Pull the tip away even more. Now keep that line of the stick to the string and pull your arm and shoulder in a backwards direction. G. A. B. Elbow backward. C. Now change the angle for the D string. Next. 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 A. Now that's good angle, Nathan. Next.
Sorry.
Good. Next. 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 Now out here, your arm's going to swing back pretty dramatically in order to match that angle on the D string. Pull that arm back even more. Now up bow. Next. 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 Swing the arm back even more. That's dramatic for the G string. Go. Next. A. Then G. Okay. Generally, you could still use swinging that arm back, keeping that arm swung back, and elbow moving in a backward direction even more on the G string. Another thing that I like to emphasize early on, although I don't always get it in with everybody, is I always prefer a lower arm rather than a higher arm.
Okay.
That way, you're just reducing as much tension as possible in the arm.
Well, and if you've got to play like Mahler 6, which is, almost an hour and a half,
you
can't afford to keep your shoulder that high for that long.
Yeah, you're not going to last.
No.
Yeah. Or like or a major concerto with orchestra.
Yeah.
You've got keep that arm nice and low, even on the A string. It's still possible to keep that arm, relatively speaking, lower instead of having to hike it up like this. You never want to do that. Never. Okay. And then the other thing that's hard to explain, but is really important, is learning how to feel that sense of weight of the arm, even as you're having to suspend your arm up in midair in order to keep the bow from just completely flopping.
Yeah.
Your arm and the bow completely flopping. And the late cellist Starker always called it the balance between tension and non-tension. He would never use the word relax.
Interesting.
Yes. I mean, I run into this mistake myself all the time, is saying, relax, 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 relax. What I'm really trying to say is, give me a chance to form your bow arm and your bow hand the way it needs to.
Mm.
Maybe that's just my code word.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to say, of course, I will often end up saying, please let me work with you. Give me a chance to form your bow arm, bow hand, fingers, or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's why I like the like Jano Starker's way of putting it as the balance between tension and non-tension.
Now, before we move on, and I ask some shifting questions and things like that,
Sure.
In regards to the bow and really getting a smooth and even tone, are there any kind of like warm-up things that my students might want to try before they, like just on an open string, before they even start playing a scale?
Early-ish on in my professional career, I was driving up from Memphis to St. Louis to work with somebody in the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. And he was really making me realize that one thing I didn't have in my arsenal of bowing is the ability to play long and slow bows at the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That is the hardest kind of bow thing to really master. And I don't want to know what people were hearing as I was really trying to develop that. But I would just say G string's probably the best to use.
Mm-hmm.
Just as slow as you can. Now, mind you, I haven't done this in a while, but the idea goes like this: as slow as you can, but still making a sound.
Impressive.
And yeah, my apologies. I would have to practice that a lot more because you actually really need to be able to move your bow a lot slower than that, but still maintain a consistent sound.
Well, and I imagine that practicing something that slow and that, even though it's really not that simple, for lack of a better word, you have a lot of time to focus on your bow direction and bow angle. And if like maybe your pinky isn't quite staying in the right spot as you get towards the tip or something like that.
Yeah, but mainly it's a matter of developing the sensitivity to calibrate your pressure, your contact. The contact point is the only thing that's a constant in this exercise. It's mainly a way of calibrating your pressure, for lack of a better word, and your bow speed.
Okay.
Or maybe lack thereof. So. You can tell how hard this really is.
So trying to get a sustained sound, but keeping the bow moving and as slow as possible. And would you play a scale in that manner as well?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. Yeah.
We do some really boring, tedious things on the violin sometimes. One of my teachers, he loved to do, it was sort of a lead up for koye and to get better tone. You'd start with pulses. You'd do 4. And you'd work up to 64. So that then once you practiced all 3 octaves of a scale, you could go through and just do really smooth full bow quarter notes.
Yeah. Another bit interesting bow exercise that somebody from New York City Opera showed me was the count was doing different amount, starting with an 8 count, but as you go to each opposite bow, you subtract 1 count from that.
Oh.
But you still have to maintain the same consistency of sound, whether it's an 8 count or whether it's a 2 count or a 1 count. Yeah.
I mean, all the time we're playing something in an orchestra where we have the whole measure has to be mezzo forte, and we've
Yeah.
got some long and sustained stuff, and then just 1/8 note alone by itself that can't be any louder.
Yeah. And you've got to find a way to get back. That's
Especially if
that
it's
exercise.
supposed to be smooth and legato.
Yeah. And there's the classic 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's not a waltz.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, there are several things that I don't really have any business allowing for public consumption.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that exercise with the 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is one of those.
Okay.
But
sorry, go ahead.
but that's another exercise that can be really useful.
So,
and
I'm sorry, I interrupted you again.
And the most important part about that really slow bow exercise is that in a lot of lyrical passages, you need to be able to save the bow at the beginning of the bow.
Mm-hmm.
That way, particularly from frog to tip, save the bow at the frog. That way, as you get towards the tip, you can generate more bow speed and launch yourself smoothly into the next bow change. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Dvorak. That's maybe a little out of scope from what we were talking about, but. Okay.
And when you're playing just now, I can really see the up and down wrist motion as opposed to a side to side one.
Yeah. And that was a Leonard Rose. That was a big Leonard Rose thing.
Okay.
And I had that passed on to me by somebody who studied with Leonard Rose, Ron Leonard, when I was at USC. Another fabulous cellist.
So we were talking before we started recording the video about the relationship between right and left hand and which one leads, if you want to talk about that for a second.
In fast, scratch that. The right hand should really lead the left hand. In fast passages, that's kind of obvious,
mm-hmm.
where the left hand just really needs to follow the bow.
Mm-hmm.
In slower passages, that could be the bow leading the left hand really becomes important in shifting.
Okay.
Let me show you.
So as my students are maybe trying to get that effect with the bow leading, what should they be feeling for, maybe in their shoulder and their arm?
I would say, sorry about missing that shift. Slower bow when you're starting the bow,
mm-hmm.
and quicker bow to help you help the rhythm of the arm movement in the left arm by the arm movement in the bow.
It's interesting you should say. One of my primary violin teacher, Sven Ronning is his name.
Mm-hmm.
He gives this whole lecture about the left and right hand have to move at the same speeds.
Yes, exactly. Let me see, and let me give you a better passage. Same piece, Shlomo.
Okay. Yeah. Is
The
that
more,
artist block?
yeah, by block, yeah. The more freedom of movement you can have in the bow, the more you'll reduce tension in your left arm, and the more consistent you'll be in your shifting.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what I'm. That's why I really make it such a point to really want to emphasize paying attention to the bow
Okay.
as a way of giving your left hand something from which to work.
That's great. Before we kind of run out of time here, I'm trying to keep these to about a half hour just so nobody gets
Sure.
too bored.
Sure.
I think we might have to save shifting for a future video if you're interested in coming back on sometime.
Oh, I'd love to.
But maybe if you tell us a little bit about that beautiful cello that you have in front of you.
I'm very lucky that that I found somebody that my family had some source of revenue with which they could get me this wonderful cello. It's a cello by Vincenzo Cennino from
I've played on a
1904.
Sonino for a couple of years. It's
Oh,
a
okay.
nice violin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've had this cello for gosh, let me do the math. 22 years.
And did he do the bird's eye maple on the back, or is it a two-piece back?
It's a two-piece back.
Oh, okay. A lot of his violins have the bird's eye maple that's just so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just difficult to find a single piece of wood big enough to
Yeah.
make a cello out of.
I've seen a couple of cellos with four-part backs.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure that's possible. But yeah, I've been really lucky, and I've enjoyed a nice long career with this cello, and had some great music making with it.
All right. Before we wrap things up, would you have any interest in maybe playing a couple minutes for us?
Let me see. Haydn.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for having me, Nathan. Enjoyed it so much.
Oh, we hope to have you again real soon, and maybe even have you out to Port Angeles someday.
I would love to. That would be great.
All right. Well, I'm going to hit stop on the recording here. We'll stay in chat for just a little bit, but thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Nathan. It was my pleasure.